How would you feel if all of your life's work were shattered in a moment? If everything that you had worked hard to accomplish in an instant turned to dust? This is exactly how Derek Rawlinson felt in 1988. He was an Olympic athlete, a British record holder for the 400-meter run. He ran it faster than any other Briton had ever done it. And he was at the 1988 Olympics, a minute and a half before his race was scheduled to begin. He suffered an injury to his Achilles tendon that would take 5 surgeries to repair and years of therapy. And in that instant, he saw his dreams and hopes go down the drain. But he didn't give up. Derek had the strong support of his father, and over the course of the next 4 years, he trained, even with his surgeries. He trained his legs and got them into shape, trained his tendons, and prepared for the 1992 Barcelona Olympics. Derek was ready to go. He stepped up to the starting line, placed his feet in the starting position. The runners got set. Derek put behind him, put out of his mind his pain, his difficulty, his trouble, his injuries, and focused on the finish line. He put everything else behind him and focused everything he had on finishing this race. Not only finishing it, but medaling. He was determined to walk out of that stadium, to walk away from Barcelona Olympics, going down in Olympic fame. The gun sounded, and he took off. Doing great. Around the first bend, gaining. Around the second bend, advancing more. He was in the perfect position. He was going to win. When suddenly, halfway into the third bend, he heard something pop in his leg. Just like that, all of his hopes were shattered once again. This time, irretrievably. There was no way for him to win. He could barely stand, let alone finish the race. His hopes were destroyed. His agony, his defeat was filled with agony. Now, that's not the end of Derek's story. We're going to come back to it in just a minute. But his story ties in with our Acts passage, Acts chapter 1. And actually it ties in with the book of Acts. Acts is much like a race. But unlike Derek's race, Acts is a relay race. It's a relay race where the baton is handed from one person to the next. In the Olympic symbolism, you could say it's the torch is handed from one person to the next. The Holy Spirit is the baton being passed from one runner, one key player to the next. And the story is really the witness of the Holy Spirit as it moves from Jerusalem out into Judea, out into Samaria, and out to the ends of the earth. We start off in Acts with Pentecost. Christ has ascended into heaven. The apostles wait. The Holy Spirit descends upon them. And on Pentecost, they speak in tongues. Everybody hears and they say, "This is amazing. We can hear these dumb fishermen talking in our own language. And we understand the amazing wonders of God." And so the witness begins, just as Christ predicted, just as Christ commanded, just as he prophesied. You will be my witnesses. It began there in Jerusalem. But it didn't stay in Jerusalem. Stephen was killed. Stephen was killed. And the Greeks, the non-Jewish or the non-Hebrew Jews, were forced to leave Jerusalem, to flee. The Christians, who were not Jewish by birth, were seen as enemies of the Jewish religion. And so they were chased out of Jerusalem. And this may have seemed like a bad thing at first, until we hear the story. The baton was passed to the Greek Jews, and they went out into Judea and started to witness as they went. And then they went out from Judea into Samaria. And Peter gets a phone call. He says, Peter, is this Peter? Yes, this is Peter speaking. Is this the apostle? Yes, Peter the apostle. Well, we've got some news for you apostles in Jerusalem. The Holy Spirit is now with Greeks who were not Jews. Greeks who were not God-fearers. Greeks who have not been circumcised. You've got to come and see it for yourself. And so the baton is handed to Peter. And Peter goes out to Cornelius' house. And he finds that indeed the Holy Spirit has passed from Jewish to international. It has gone from something that is strictly Jewish, a Jewish religion, to something that goes beyond the Jewish boundaries. And Peter is astounded and celebrates the move of the Holy Spirit. The baton is passed from the apostles in Jerusalem to the Greek believers, the Greek Christians. Philip, as he talks to the Ethiopian, he goes to Cornelius. Peter goes to Cornelius. He takes the baton and goes to Cornelius. And then from there, Paul comes into the story. Paul is converted. Paul changes. He becomes a Christian believer. And he says, this is just the beginning. Cornelius is just one person. And Paul takes the baton and he runs with it into Asia Minor, Turkey, and into the Greek, the Roman Empire, and goes and takes it into this new world. He goes on 3 mission trips that we have recorded in Acts. And that's where we are in our study. We're in the second of those 3 missionary journeys. We're going to pick up with that next week. But Paul continues to preach the witness. Remember, it's the witness that is moving. It's the witness that is the baton that's being passed. The witness by the Holy Spirit through the people. And it's just a different person who carries the baton. And so Paul carries this baton, this witness, but then he is arrested. But he doesn't drop the baton. He continues to carry that witness. And he witnesses to his jailers. And he witnesses to the judges. And he witnesses to the jury. And he witnesses to the prison guards. And he witnesses to people who come to see him. He witnesses his way all the way to the heart of the Roman Empire. And then the story stops. It ends abruptly, so it seems. We don't know what happens to Paul according to the Bible. The Bible doesn't tell us. Now, history and tradition have it that Paul was executed, but we're not going to read that in Acts. And so, for all intents and purposes, it seems almost like somebody walked in on this video of this relay race where the baton was getting ready to be handed off, and they pressed pause. And Paul is left holding the baton. And it seems like that's the end of the story. But you know that pause is never the end of the story. And really what's happening, and I think this is a powerful thing that God intended, that Luke probably did not intend, that the baton is being handed off to us. Now, I don't mean that Paul took it and threw it down the ages. I mean that Paul handed it to the first century believers. And the first century believers handed the baton to the second century believers. And then so on and so forth as it passed down through the ages. And eventually, we reached out behind us and we took the baton as believers, as followers of Christ. We picked up that baton and we carried the torch. And we carry it today. We are called by Christ in Acts to carry that baton and to hold that light high, right? This little light of mine, don't let Satan blow it out, don't hide it under the remember? We are carrying that Olympic torch, that divine Olympic torch in our lives today. I think that is the story of Acts, the ongoing story of Acts, the unfinished book of Acts. I don't know what chapter it would be. You know, we can figure out that Acts is 24 chapters, I think, 24 or 26 chapters, and it covered a span of about 10 or 15 years. And we could try to do calculations, and Mary's going to go home today and figure it out. You know, 10 years is to 24 chapters or 25 chapters. We got to figure out 2,000 years is how many chapters we can figure out. We're on chapter, what? Yes, you can do that. Give me a call this afternoon. We're on chapter